I turned 67 last October. Though most mornings I feel older, closer to the brittle edge of 80 than the stubborn will of 60. My doctor says it's the knees. I think it's the loneliness. Knees can be replaced. Silence can't. Still, every day at 6:12 a.m., I unlock the metal shutter of Harlow's Market, the little family grocery my father built in 1958, and I kept breathing long after stopped. The shutters groan like old men rising from chairs. Appropriate enough. I flick on the lights. The bulbs hesitate, flutter, then settle into their weary glow. Same as me. The market smells of coffee ground citrus and the faint musk of old wood. The counter has grooves from decades of elbows, my father's, mine, and once my son's. I used to imagine Tom inheriting those grooves the way other men imagine sons inheriting cheekbones. I used to imagine many things. That morning, the one that split my life cleanly in half, I poured coffee from my battered Stanley thermos and noticed the silence felt heavier than usual. Silence is only peaceful when you choose it. When it arrives on its own, it comes with teeth. Tom came in 20 minutes late. Again, his hair was styled to look effortless, which I've learned means it takes effort. And he wore a jacket that cost more than the store's monthly electric bill. He used to wear cheap flannel overshirts and asked me if oranges were supposed to be that shade of orange. Now he walked around like the aisles were obstacles in his destiny. "Morning?" I said. He grunted, eyes glued to his phone. The device was always in his hand now, as if oxygen were pumped through its ports. I stocked the tomatoes, arranged the onions, wiped the counter. The routine soothed me until it didn't anymore. When the buzz in my knees got too sharp, I approached him. "Tom, listen, I need to pick up my insulin today, and some groceries. Could you spot me $200 until Friday?" He didn't even lift his head. "Dad," he said flatly, thumbs moving across the screen. "I can't keep bailing you out." Bailing me out. The words hit with the quiet violence of a hammer wrapped in cloth. "I'm not asking for much," I said carefully. I said I can't," he repeated louder. "I've got responsibilities now." Responsibilities. He said it like I never had any. Like raising him, paying his college, covering his medical bills when he shattered his ankle at 18. Co-signing his first car loan. None of that counted as responsibility, just background noise. I swallowed the sting. "All right," I murmured. "Don't worry about it." He shrugged and walked off, still scrolling. For 10 minutes I stood there, hand on the counter, staring at the reflection in the freezer door. A man with thinning gray hair, a man who once carried grocery crates that weighed more than his pride, a man who survived burying his wife without becoming bitter, a man who apparently could not borrow $200 from his own son. I pushed the shame down the way old men push down heartburn. Habitually, hopelessly. Around lunchtime, the store phone rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered. "Mr. Harlow?" A polite, too-young voice. "This is Melissa from First Mountain Bank. We detected unusual activity on your business account." My stomach tightened. "Unusual?" "Yes, sir. Several large withdrawals. Transfers you may want to review." She read out the numbers. $12,700 on December 19th. $7,900 on January 2nd. $14,300 on January 27th. $23,400 3 days ago. I gripped the receiver so tightly the cord creaked. "Those transfers," she continued, "were authorized by your co-owner." "My what?" "Your co-owner, sir. Mrs. Ashley Carter Harlow." My daughter-in-law. The one with the icy smile and expensive ambitions. The one who said last Thanksgiving, "This store really needs a rebrand in Nathan, maybe something modern." My voice scraped out of me. I never added her as co-owner. Melissa hesitated. "Well, the documents on file show your signature." My chest felt tight. Wrong tight. I don't frighten easily, but in that moment something cold slid into me. A realization, faint but sharp. Something in my life had been moving behind my back. Something wearing my son's face. "Sir?" Melissa asked. "Would you like to come in to review the files?" I stared across the store at Tom, who was laughing at something on his phone. "Yes," I whispered. "I believe I would." And that was the morning the world, as I knew it, began to split, quiet as paper tearing. First Mountain Bank has always smelled of lemon polish and polite disappointment. The kind of place where people whisper even when no one is around. I sat in the office of a young man named Brandon, 25, maybe 26, with a haircut so sharp it could part the seas. He had the earnest smile of someone who still believed paperwork never lies. Mr. Harlow, he began, sliding a folder across the desk. We've compiled all the documents associated with the ownership changes and withdrawals. The stack was thicker than I expected. Too thick. I opened it. The first page hit me like a fist. Harlow's Market LLC. Ownership Transfer Agreement. Signatures. Nathaniel Harlow. Ashley Carter Harlow. Except my signature looked cheerful. Rounded loops. Confident strokes. Just wrong. I signed my name like an old soldier, fast, tired, and slightly downhill. Whoever forged it had never worked 12 hours behind a cash register. Brandon cleared his throat. These are notarized, sir. I stared at him. Do you think I signed this? I asked. He blinked rapidly. Well, the notary stamped. Do you think I signed it? I repeated, slower this time, letting the weight of my age settle between us. 67 years earns a man the right to ask a question without sugar. He swallowed. I can't say for certain. Of course he couldn't. I flipped to the next set of papers. Property transfer residential. The house my wife and I paid off together. Signed away. To Ashley. Lien removal business vehicle. The old blue service van. Signed away. To Ashley. My pulse hammered in my ears. A life built over 40 years, reshaped behind my back in a matter of signatures I never made. Sir, Brandon said gently. These came through in 3 batches. December, January, and late January again. And each time, I said, staring at the ink, no one asked why a man who comes into this bank twice a year suddenly changed the owners of everything he owns. Brandon stiffened. We followed protocol. The word protocol tasted like ashes. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, watching a crack run through my understanding of my son like a fault line. Tom hadn't just been careless. He had planned this, piece by piece, signature by signature, forging the name of the man who raised him. Brandon hesitated again. Would you like us to freeze the accounts? Freeze? The accounts were already empty, or close enough. I looked at the last sheet. Business account ending 5518. Available balance. $212.97. 58,000 gone. Gone into what? Vacations? Furniture? Crypto fantasies? Or whatever Ashley whispered into his ear at night, feeding him images of a bigger, shinier life than the one I gave him. I closed the folder carefully, the way a man closes a casket. Thank you, I said quietly, standing. Outside, the winter sun glared off the cars in the parking lot, sharp and cold. I walked to my truck slowly, feeling every year in my bones. On the drive back to the market, questions crawled through my head like unwelcome shadows. When had Tom started seeing me not as a father, but an obstacle? When had responsibility turned into entitlement? When had gratitude curdled into resentment? I parked behind the store, shutting off the engine but staying seated. My breath fogged the windshield. Inside, I could see Tom moving boxes in the stockroom, whistling, as though the world were right side up. I walked in through the back. Tom, I said, voice steady. He didn't turn immediately. That alone told me everything. What's up? He said eventually, wiping his hands on his designer hoodie. I held up the copy of the forged ownership agreement. You want to explain this to me? His eyes flicked to the paper and away again, quickly. Oh, that, he muttered. Dad, we went over this. You said you didn't want the hassle anymore. I never said that. You probably forgot. I felt something cold unfurl inside my chest. Tom, I said slowly, painfully. I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me you think that's my signature. He looked, but only for a moment. A flicker of something. Guilt? Fear? Annoyance? Crossed his face. Then he scoffed. You're overreacting. Overreacting. The word landed with hollow finality. He took a step closer. Dad, let it go. Ashley and I are trying to build the future. You should be happy for us. Besides, he shrugged, you weren't doing anything useful with the store anyway. We can make it better. Better. As if my entire life's work were a broken toy he could repaint. And the money? I asked quietly. Almost $60,000 doesn't disappear into thin air. His jaw tightened. Ashley needed it. investments, renovations, planning. Don't make this into a big deal. But it was a big deal. Not the money, not the store, not even the house. It was the certainty, cold and merciless, that my son believed everything I ever built already belonged to him, and that I no longer did. I nodded once. Not agreement, acknowledgement. All right, I said softly. If that's how it is. He smiled, thinking he'd won something. But all he'd done was open the door to a part of me I hadn't needed in years. The part that remembers every count, every key, every backup plan. The part that buried a wife and kept walking. The part he underestimated. I didn't go home after closing the store. Home hadn't felt like home in years. Ever since the night my wife, Margaret, whispered her last words into my neck and left the world quieter than I could bear. I kept the house clean, kept her knitted blankets folded on the sofa, kept her mug on the kitchen shelf. But that night, I couldn't step inside it, not carrying what I now knew. So instead, I drove. Not fast. Old men don't drive fast unless they're racing death. And I wasn't racing. I was remembering. As the road hummed under my tires, I found myself repeating Margaret's old warning. People change, Nate. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. But they always leave clues. For months, I felt something shifting. Tom avoiding conversations. The sudden secrecy around paperwork. Ashley suggesting modernization. The new car. The designer coats. The way they'd slip into the back office together. Closing the door like the store belonged to them. Clues. Hundreds of them. And I had ignored every one. The streetlights glowed through the windshield as I stopped outside my lawyer's old office. The building was dark now. He died 3 years back, but the sight of it stirred another memory, one that had slept quietly until tonight. A gray metal box, a spare key, a conversation on a snowy morning long ago. Nate, if you ever worry the business might fall into the wrong hands, I trust my son. My lawyer had paused, sighed, and handed me a document, just in case. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the bank's after-hours number. Midnight banking for business clients, something I'd never used, something I'd almost forgotten existed. The automated line picked up then a real person, and 15 minutes later, I was driving toward First Mountain Bank's secure branch. The parking lot was empty except for a single security vehicle. The guard inside the vestibule waved me through. Older man, kind eyes, probably wondered what trouble could push a 70-year-old through the door at that hour. Evening, he said, unlocking the inner glass door. Evening, I replied, though evening had long since died. Inside, the banker on night duty, a thin, nervous woman named Kristen, met me with a stack of forms. She looked surprised, maybe intimidated, by the intensity of my expression. "What exactly do you need to access, Mr. Harlow?" she asked softly. I placed the metal key on the counter. "I want box 219. She blinked, looked up the number. Her eyebrows lifted. "That box hasn't been opened since 2016. "I know." It took signatures, verification, and quiet minutes where the only sound was the turning of a heavy lock. And then she handed me the box. Sturdy, heavier than I remembered. I carried it into the small private room. The walls were beige. The chair squeaked. The fluorescent light buzzed. It could have been a confession booth for sinners who confessed only to the beige paint. Inside the box were 3 things. 1. The original business registration papers, notarized nearly a decade ago. 2. A backup ownership contract signed by me and witnessed by my lawyer. 3. A notarized document granting me unilateral reversion rights, the legal equivalent of a reset button. Margaret had insisted on the last one, just in case. "Mr. Harlow?" Kristen called from a doorway. "Will you need copies tonight?" "Yes," I said. "All of them." It took nearly 40 minutes. By then, something inside me had settled. Not the bitterness, not the anger, but a kind of bone-deep steadiness. The feeling a man gets when he realizes he has nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing left to fear. At 11:46 p.m., I signed the reversion document. At 11:59 p.m., Kristen filed it electronically with the state. At 12:03 a.m., the system refreshed. Primary ownership, Nathaniel Harlow. At 12:11 a.m., the forged documents were flagged. At 12:17 a.m., all access granted to Tom and Ashley was revoked. At 12:32 a.m., their cards turned to plastic. By 1:04 a.m., every asset they'd quietly stripped, store, house, vehicle, was back under my name, legally sealed and protected. When I stepped out of the bank, the night felt colder, but not unfriendly. Honest cold. The kind that doesn't pretend to be anything else. I drove back to the store, parked, sat there for a long moment, engine off, my breath fogging the windshield. Inside the dark shop, I changed the locks. One on the front door, one on the back, one on the office. The metal clinks echoed like punctuation marks in a chapter one had never planned to write. At 2:17 a.m., I flicked off the last light and stood in the dark, listening to the freezer hum. Steady, loyal, old. I thought of Tom's face earlier, the dismissiveness, the arrogance, the belief that my silence was his permission. Sometimes fathers make the mistake of loving their children too softly, but soft love breaks, quietly, all at once. I locked the door behind me. When morning came, my son would find out he no longer owned the life he tried to steal. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel weak. I felt prepared. By the time dawn crept across the parking lot, pale and watery through the February haze, I was already inside the store. The new locks clicked satisfyingly as I turned the key, small metal confirmations that, for once, I had acted before being acted upon. I brewed a pot of coffee the way Margaret liked it, dark, strong, with that bitter edge she said kept a person honest. The shop was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerators and the soft tick of the wall clock. For a moment, the world felt almost peaceful. Then my son arrived, not gently, not thoughtfully, but like a storm kicking in the front door. The first blow hit the handle, rattling the entire frame. "Dad, open the damn door." His voice, louder, harsher than I remembered, cut straight through the morning stillness. I didn't rush. I didn't tremble. Not anymore. I walked to the front, coffee mug in hand, and peered through the glass. Tom stood on the steps, red-faced, confusion and fury twisting his features. Beside him, wrapped in an expensive camel coat, was Ashley, arms crossed tightly, her expression sharp enough to cut tile. The second blow shook the door. Behind them, curious pedestrians slowed, glancing over. Perfect, I thought. Let them see. I cracked the door, open only an inch, and stood in the gap. "You're early today," I said calmly. "What the hell did you do?" Tom spat. His breath fogged the glass. "My card got declined at the gas station." Declined. And Ashley's too. She stepped forward, voice cold enough to frost the air. "And the mortgage company says the house title changed back." "Why would they say that, Nathan?" "Because," I said, sipping my coffee. It did. A murmur from a sidewalk. Old Mr. Hancock, who always buys his newspaper at 7:15, had paused mid-step. Two teenagers with backpacks hovered near the entrance. Even the postal worker slowed. Tom jammed his palm against the door. "Open it." I didn't move. "You changed everything back?" he demanded. "Without telling us? Without telling you?" I echoed. "Tom, you forged my name. You moved my property. You drained my business accounts. Without telling me." His mouth open, closed, open again. "That's not, Dad, you're confused." "Let me stop you right there," I said, just loud enough for the gathering crowd. "I am many things. Old, tired, maybe even stubborn. But confused? No. I know exactly what my own signature looks like." Ashley stepped forward. "You had no right to undo our work." "Our work." The phrase tasted like rust. "Your work," I repeated. "That's an interesting way to describe theft." Gasps behind them. Someone whispered, "Theft." Tom's eyes flickered between me and the small audience, panic creeping in. "Dad," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded brutal. "Can we talk inside? Privately?" "No," I said gently. "There are no private conversations left between us." I pushed the door open just enough to step outside, closing it behind me. The cold air bit my cheeks. My mug warmed my hands. "I went to the bank," I said. "I saw everything." Tom's jaw clenched. "Okay, fine," he snapped. "We used some of the funds for the business, for improvements." Improvements? I raised a brow. "Is that what you call $20,000 transfers to Diamond Point Luxury Interiors?" Ashley's face drained to chalk. "That wasn't. You don't understand how investments." And the 14,000 to a resort in Cabo? I added lightly. Was that a business expense too? A team-building retreat for the two of you? A chuckle rippled through the onlookers. Ashley's eyes burned. You had no right, she repeated, now trembling with anger. None. I had every right, I said. More right than you ever had. Everything you touched belonged to me. You took advantage of trust, of family, of my silence. Tom stepped so close I could smell the expensive cologne I'd never seen him afford. Dad, he hissed, you can't do this. You're sabotaging our future. I met his eyes. Those were Margaret's eyes, but they had none of her gentleness. Son, I said softly, you sabotaged your own. His face twisted. So what? He barked. You want us out on the streets? Is that it? You want us to starve? No, I said. I want you to learn what hunger actually feels like. The kind I felt every time you lied, and I swallowed the truth to protect you. A long, thick silence settled. Then Tom lunged for the door, but the new lock held firm. You can't lock us out, he shouted. We own this place. No, I said, pulling a folder from behind my coat. You don't. I handed him photocopies of the reversion documents, the ownership filings, the fraud report. He scanned the pages, his expression crumpling, reforming, then crumpling again. You reported us, he whispered. Yes. You're my father. And you, I said, should have acted like my son. Ashley tore the papers from his hand, scanning with frantic eyes. This is illegal, she snapped. You can't just... It's all legal, I said. You two were the only illegal part. The postal worker whistled under his breath. Someone muttered, good for him. Tom looked around, seeing the audience he hadn't wanted. His shoulders slumped, something deflating inside him. You'll regret this, he said weakly. No, I said. I regretted trusting you. This is just correction. I walked back inside, closed the door, locked it. Outside, I heard Ashley's voice rise, sharp, shocked, furious. But I didn't listen. The store hummed around me, steady and warm. For the first time in years, the place felt safe. And for the first time since my wife died, I felt like the man she married, strong enough to stand even alone. A month passed. February slid into March, the cold loosening its grip on the town the way grief sometimes loosens its grip on a man, not because the weight is gone, but because he has learned how to carry it. Harlow's market was quiet most mornings now. People spoke softly around me, not out of pity, but out of something more respectful, almost reverent. Word travels fast in a small town, faster, sometimes, than decency. Everyone had heard the story. Old man Harlow taking back everything his son tried to steal. The confrontation on the steps. Ashley's public meltdown. The police cruiser idling outside their rental house a week later. Some customers pretended they didn't know a thing. Others couldn't help themselves. Good on you, Nate, Mrs. Lee said, sliding 2 oranges onto the counter. Some children need a leash. Nathan, you're a braver man than most, whispered old Roger, leaning on his cane. My own boy, you did what I couldn't. I never asked for praise. I didn't enjoy it. But a part of me, some fragile, worn piece, felt less alone each time someone spoke those words. Evening routine kept me sane. I swept the floor, counted the register, brewed coffee for the next day. Sometimes I'd sit at the little table in the break room and whisper to Margaret's memory. You were right. Clues everywhere. I just didn't want to see them. The house was quiet at night, still larger than I needed. I'd started sleeping in the extra bedroom, not the one we shared, because after 25 years of marriage, a half-empty bed feels colder than a floor. But little by little, the world became bearable again. The first time Tom came by after the confrontation, he didn't come inside. He stood outside the glass door at closing time, shivering in a jacket too thin for the weather. He looked smaller, shaved down somehow, like someone had planed the arrogance right off him. His knuckles tapped weakly against the window. I opened the door, but only halfway. Dad, he said. His voice cracked. That never used to happen. We need help. I studied him. Really studied him. His cheeks hollowed. His hair unstyled. No flashy sneakers. No new phone glowing in his hand. Ashley was nowhere in sight. You already had help, Tom, I said. More help than you ever earned. He swallowed. His breath fogged the air between us. I know, he whispered. I know I messed up. I didn't blink. That's not the word for it. He nodded slowly, shame creeping into the spaces where pride lived before. We're struggling. Ashley's parents won't speak to us. The charges. He stopped, rubbing a shaking hand across his face. Dad, please. I just need something. Something. Always something. But this time I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel joy in his downfall either. Just a quiet, heavy clarity. Tom, I said gently, I needed help too. When I asked for groceries. When I asked for honesty. When I asked for a son. He closed his eyes. I think those words hurt him more than any judge ever could. Please, he said again, voice breaking. I shook my head. Go home, Tom. The look on his face, defeated, desperate, twisted something inside me, but not enough to change the truth. He had broken something fundamental, something that couldn't be rebuilt with apologies shaped like pleas. He stepped back, shoved his hands into his pockets, nodded once, twice, and walked away. I closed the door, turned the deadbolt, stood there listening to his footsteps fade into the cold. 2 weeks later, I went to court for the preliminary hearing. I didn't sit near Tom and Ashley. I didn't look at them when the charges were read. Fraud, forgery, identity falsification, financial exploitation of an elder. The judge glanced at me once, eyes soft with something like sympathy. I didn't need it. I wasn't a victim. I was just late to my own awakening. When it was my turn to speak, I simply said, I'm not asking for revenge, only restoration. The prosecutor nodded. The defense wilted. The process would play out on its own. I stepped out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years. Spring arrived early that year. By April, the store smelled of fresh basil and soil from the seed packets I put on display. The windows were clean, the shelves neatly stocked. I'd repainted the sign out front myself, shaky hand, crooked letters, imperfect, but unmistakably mine. One afternoon, I brewed a pot of stew, a recipe Margaret perfected over decades, and set out little paper cups for customers to sample. People smiled as they tasted it. Just like your wife used to make, Mrs. Green said, wiping tears. Yes, I answered softly. It is. Later that night, when the sun dipped and the street quieted, I locked up the store and stood in the middle of the empty floorboards, breathing in the warm scent of stew and old wood. This place had held me up my entire life, through marriage, grief, disappointment, and now betrayal. And it was still standing. So as I turned off the final light switch, I whispered the sentence I knew would close this chapter forever. Now, son, now you truly understand what hunger feels like.